Greetings everyone, and welcome to my Innistrad Midnight Hunt Draft Archetype Breakdown. I'm recording this before the set has been released, so this is only very initial impressions and it's not a very comprehensive a breakdown covering everything the color combinations have to offer. But I will be going through each of the 10 color combinations. I won't be commenting about any 5-color green archetypes. There is a green common land fetch with a flashback that you could use to draft a multiple color deck for 3, 4, or 5 colors. But I won't be going through that kind of a deck because you can basically put anything in such a deck, and if it's a viable archetype, that's great. But it doesn't really require any specific cards other than the mana fixing. So you just usually in that kind of deck play all the removal and all the bumps you get, and enough mana fixing and some enough cheap cards to have a proper mana curve still, and you don't get run over by the opponent. So each of the 10 color combinations will be covered here. Of course, it's also sometimes possible to draft monocolor decks, but then you just take all the best cards for that color. It happens only when the color is super open in the draft pod. It's not very frequent thing, but of course it can happen. But most commonly you will be drafting a 2-color deck. Maybe you have a splash of some removal or bumps, but the base of the deck will be a 2-color deck, and there are 10 color combinations. What I'm doing here is for each color combination, I'm going to I'm going to show the golden uncommons. There are 2 for each color pair, which are uncommons. Of course, there are rares, but I'm not going to even show the rares or talk about the rares because you in Limited don't get to often pick certain rares. Of course, they are built around rares and rares that really enhance the theme of some certain mechanic, and they are great to draft around, but I'm just listing the cards you will most often see in the draft, which are commons and uncommons, and which I think are somehow good for the particular color combination. And I'm not listing all the cards, I'm just listing some of the cards. And I guess that's enough for the introduction here. Let's go to blue-white, which I think has well, these cards are one of the cards that are at least better in blue-white. Now, first of all, let's go through the gold uncommons here. The Devoted Graph Keeper is definitely a good card and basically could be a first pickable card. Of course, if you go to pack 1, pick 1 and pick a 2-color card, it's going to be a bit risky pick because obviously those 2 colors have to be sufficiently open for you to be able to draft around that. And this is not exactly a splashable card. I don't think any of these really are. There might be a few of these of these golden uncommons that are splashable, but most of them are not. Anyway, Devoted Graph Keeper is definitely a good card. 2 mana, 2/1. With a, well, maybe the front half isn't that good, but the idea is that you get a 2 mana 2/1, you trade it with something, and then you have a disturb cost of 3 mana that gives you a 3/1 flyer, which can't block ground guys, but still it's pretty decent. And then the next one is Faithful Mending. It doesn't net you cards, but assuming you have in blue-white, you should have some disturb creatures, so you can discard those. And of course, every color has access to some number of flashback cards, although white doesn't have a lot of them, but blue has a few. So it's of course nice to discard cards that are still usable from graveyard. It's not a great card. I mean, I wouldn't really pick this very high, but if I'm at blue and white, then it's a playable card. And these 4 cards I picked from the commons and uncommons from blue and white that I think are well, let's go them through these card by card. So the Blessed Defiance I don't think is a good card in general, but blue-white has the thing that a lot of the cards have disturb. So the Blessed Defiance, it does the full thing only when the creature dies that turn when you cast this. So the idea is that you have a disturb creatures you can maybe trade up with something and you gain some life too, and then you get a 1/1 spirit token, all this for 1 mana, and then when the disturb creature is in your graveyard, you can of course cast it as the, for example, in this case, you would get the Departed Soulkeeper, but there are a lot of other commons and uncommons, and of course rares with this step ability. So I think the Blessed Defiance is not really playable in most of the white decks, but in the blue-white deck it probably is if you combine it with disturb creatures. And the same thing goes for the Cathar's Call. This usually is, I think, way too risky to be picked, but when you put this card on a some low-impact disturb creature, you basically either are getting those free 1/1 tokens, which is definitely nice if you get these for several turns. But of course the risk is that the opponent deals with the card, and if they kill the card, it's just a very bad situation to be in if you only got like a 1/1 human token, and that's it. But if you put this on a there are a lot of disturb creatures that are not really that great, and the opponent doesn't really want to use removal on them, especially because they come back as a flying spirit. By the way, all the disturb creatures have flying when you cast the backside, so that's also something to keep in mind. You will have a lot of evasion if you have a lot of disturb creatures in your deck. Anyway, point is, I wouldn't play this in most white decks, but in the blue-white archetype, assuming I found like at least 5 or 6 disturb creatures, I think the card can be quite good. And then the Ominous Roost, I'm not sure how good it's gonna be, but because there are a bunch of disturb creatures, I'm assuming that you will have some number of disturb creatures in blue-white deck, and of course some blue flashback spells. You are going to get a few 1/1 tokens. And this of course gives you 1 token already when you cast it. It would be pretty bad to play this for 3 mana if you didn't get anything out of it. But of course 1/1 blue flying token that can't block ground guys is definitely not worth 3 mana and a card. It won't be even worth 1 mana and a card. But the point is that if you can get like a 2 to 3 additional tokens with the Ominous Roost by playing just stuff from your graveyard, it's going to be pretty decent card. And this is not the only color combination the Roost is usable in, but I think in blue-white it's something you could consider picking fairly high. And then we have a Shipwreck Shiftless, which is 2 mana 1/2 that loots when it enters. But the 1/2 is bad. But the idea is that it becomes a 2/3 for 2 mana if you discard a spirit or a card with disturb. And of course you want to specifically discard a card with disturb, because then you can use it again from the graveyard. There are some spirits that are not double faced. They are front side of the card is, well, the only side the card has, and it's a spirit. You can also discard those. But ideally you will discard a disturb card, and this is the color combination where the Shipwreck Shiftless is not only playable but can also be better than your average 2-drop. Whereas in other color combinations this card is not really something you are looking to maybe play, and I assume you get these things late in the draft. So the point is that you can get maybe multiple of these rather easily without even picking them very high in a draft. And before I go to the next color combination, the blue-white deck it seems to be that because you get so many flyers, because like I said, all the disturb creatures have a flying, but they are also very expensive. Well, not this one, but most of them are. The disturb cost is more than what you usually want to pay for the creature with its abilities and stats. But of course, the idea is that you don't. It doesn't cost you a card when you get the disturb creature, but racing will be incredibly hard with them, because if you pay, let's say, 4 mana for a 2/1 flyer, it's not really great if your opponent plays a 4 mana 4/4 or something like that, 4 mana 4/3. Racing will be hard, so you will be having a lot of flyers you can use to finish the game with. But what you need to have in the blue-white color pair usually is some good ground defenses. There's a blue common that's a 3 mana 1/4. There's a blue common that's a 5 mana 3/6, which can even be unblockable if you pay 3 mana. And there are of course some cheap creatures with high toughness. Those are cards you want to prioritize probably when you play blue-white in most cases. And then you can just win with the flyers. You will be eventually getting with the disturb mechanic. And of course, they are just, flyers in blue-white in general. You don't have to cast the disturb cards to get that. But that's my initial impression about the blue-white archetype. And next one is a blue-black. So it's the zombie color pair, and the gold uncommons. The Blade Stitched Scarp is of course fantastic because it's a 2-mana 2/3 and that boosts all the zombies. And of course the decayed zombies are also, well, they are zombies, unsurprisingly. And then there's the Corpse Gobble, which works very nicely with decayed zombies. In Magic Arena, unless they are making some exceptions for how the game handles the turns, if you attack with a decayed zombie, it will at the end of it's the end of combat step in the combat phase, the last step in the combat phase. It will trigger and you will sacrifice it. And normally Magic Arena doesn't let you respond to your own triggers. It just automatically resolves. The opponent gets a priority, but you don't get. So you might want to use full control or just put a manual stop in the last step of the combat phase on Magic Arena to be able to use the Corpse Gobble to its fullest, because the idea is that you can attack, well, of course you can sacrifice any creatures, not just the decayed zombies, but the ideal use for this card is that you have some decayed zombies you basically got for free from some effects, and then you can attack with them. They will deal damage, assuming opponent doesn't block them so that they die, but those that survived after combat damage have been dealt, they are about to die in end of combat. Just use full control or a manual stop, so you can use the Corpse Gobble to sacrifice them, for example in response to the trigger that goes to stack, and then you can get a nice big creature ideally. I think both of these cards are good because, well, this Corpse Gobble is good mostly because it's fairly easy to get those tokens with decayed when you play blue and black, because a lot of the cards give it to them basically for free. Other cards that are good, I mean specifically good for this color combination, are the Scarp Wrangler. I think the Wrangler is good in any blue deck. You would play this, I think, in any blue deck, but you will be having a lot better use for this card when you have those decayed zombies. You can tap just them. You don't have to attack with them. You can use the Scarp Wrangler to tap opposing creatures without using mana. That's great. This will be a high pick in a blue-black, I'm pretty sure. Vivisection is another card that also works in the blue-white, by the way, but I only put basically 2 cards per color here. Because you can sacrifice the disturb creatures and then still have them come back later. But of course, the ideal use maybe is to just sacrifice a decayed zombie, and then you get to draw 3 cards for 4 mana, which is pretty good. And Crawl from the Cellar is good because it gets you the +1/+1 counter rather easily. Blue and black have other zombies than just the decayed tokens, like we see in here, and there are more than these. So when you get a card back from your graveyard and a +1/+1 counter for free, all this costs 1 mana. It's pretty good. And then this also has flashback. I think this would be an okay card even without flashback, but it also has a flashback, which is of course pretty expensive, but I mean, it's an extra feature of the card. You get another card back and another +1/+1 counter ideally. So it's going to be a good card in this color combination. It's not so good necessarily in some other color combinations. Now black will always have some zombies, but in blue-black also blue has zombies. So it's especially good in this archetype. I'm not saying it's a high pick or anything. It's just it's a card you probably want to pick at some point in the draft. And then we have a Siege Zombie, a 2-mana 2/2, also playable in all black decks, but it's of course a lot better. Just like the Scarp Wrangler, when you have those decayed zombies, you can just keep tapping and cause some additional life loss for the opponent, basically for free. So this is still not like a high pick, but it's a card you don't mind running multiple copies of in a blue-black deck, I think, at least. And otherwise, how does the blue-black deck play out? I think it's not that slow. It's pretty aggressive. You can get a lot of those decayed zombies, and you can always just attack with them. Let's say opponent has 2 blockers and you have 4 decayed zombies. That means you can deal 4 extra damage to your opponent because they can only block 2 of them. And blue of course has flyers, so I think it's a mid-range deck, but it's not really a control deck. And of course, black has a lot of good removal, so it can be a control deck. But you're maybe a bit more aggressive than blue-black in general is in limited formats. Then we have black-red. Well, this this color combination is definitely aggressive, and the Hungry for More is, I don't think it's a good card, but basically it does give you some. I mean, it basically just deals damage to the opponent because these tokens cease to exist the same turn you get them, and you don't get permanent board presence for them. But of course, that's a lot of damage you can deal for one card. Six damage, assuming the opponent can't block these things, and well, if they block so that they are trading creatures, that's fantastic for you. But assuming if they have like a 2/5, of course the card does nothing. Well, it does gain you like 3 life, but that's it. Anyway, this is a very aggressive archetype, and this could be okay in it. I'm not saying this is a high pick. It's something you could consider playing when you are black-red. Because you will be aggressive most likely. And this is also very good when you are playing against other aggressive deck and you are racing, because the lifelink is super relevant in that case. Against some decks that are just trying to, contain your aggression, you don't care about the gaining life that much, but in an aggressive mirror match, the lifelink is really going to matter a lot. And the Vampire Socialite is a card I would be willing to first pick. It's a 2-color card, and like I said, it can just end up getting abandoned unless both these colors are sufficiently open. But the abilities are just so good. Black and red have a lot of vampires, and as you can read the +1/+1 counters this gives you, they are just good. And a 2/2 menace for 2 is also a very good base stat line for a creature. That's better than your average 2-drop for sure. And then you add the counter adding abilities, and this is just a very good card. And out of the monocolor cards, I picked these 4. So Bladebrand is always an okay card, but you are looking to attack with the vampires a lot, because I didn't actually pick any of the vampire mechanic cards here, but the vampire mechanic in Midnight Hunt is that when you play those vampires, they have an extra effect if the opponent lost life that turn. Sometimes it can be a trigger that happens at the end of turn, but a lot of them are enters the battlefield triggers. So you want to be attacking with creatures, and you want the opponent to not block them to get the full benefit from your black and red cards usually. So the Bladebrand works in a way that, of course, opponent knows that when you're playing black and red, they want to block your stuff. They don't want to give you those enters the battlefield abilities for free. So with this Bladebrand, you can just freely attack into anything. Even if the opponent has a good blocker, you can just get rid of it by maybe you lose maybe your 2-drop, but you draw a card and they lose their card. It's pretty okay in that case, I think. So I don't think this is a very high pick for this color combination, but I don't think it's necessarily a card you want to even run in all of the color combinations. In some you do want to, but in black-red you definitely don't mind having this in your deck. And the Vampire Interloper, it's going to be a good card pretty surely in any deck. It can't block, so if you're super defensive, maybe you are not that interested in it. But I'm saying that in this black-red archetype specifically, it's a very high pick. It is a very cheap, evasive threat, 2 power flyer for 2 mana. And what makes it so good is that, of course, it will allow your vampires trigger easily. If the opponent can't block this flyer, you basically get your vampire enters the battlefield trap abilities triggered pretty easily. This is a high pick when you're black-red. And then we have a Thermo Alchemist. It's good because it deals a damage to opponent by just tapping, thus allowing your vampires get the full trigger. And this is also 1 damage per turn at least. Of course, sometimes you have instant or sorceries and you get more damage. But the black-red deck is very aggressive, and sometimes opponent might be able to stabilize, but this is basically unblockable damage you can just deal. If you are aggressive enough to maybe make the opponent go down to 6 or 5 life, this will finish the job easily in a couple of turns. So it's a very good card in this color combination. And then we have a Voldaren Stinger, which is just an example of a card that is not necessarily that good in a lot of the decks, but in black-red it is, because first strike, as it's attacking with the pump ability, means that the opponent can't just block, especially if they are tapped out, so that you are not attacking into open mana. You can threaten the activation here, so if they have like a 3/3, they cannot block with it, because you can just make this into a 3/1 first striker in that case. Point is, this card goes through quite often, and then that allows again your vampires to get their good triggers. So yeah, black-red, pretty straightforward, aggressive deck, and you can play some pump spells. There are some nice pump spells, but there's also a lot of good removal for black and red. And of course, you want to have enough creatures in your deck too. So don't go overboard with the pump spells, because mostly your non-creature spells should maybe be removal spells. Black has at least 3 good common removal spells. Red has some too. And of course, more when we're talking about uncommon, so you could easily end up with, let's say, 5 or 6 even removal spells in a black-red deck. So even though in an aggressive deck the combat tricks can be okay, remember to play also enough creatures. You definitely want to play a creature on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, if possible, in all games when you have black and red deck, and try to pressure the opponent, and then you can start using your removal to clear way for your attackers. So that's black-red. And then, I want to mention this about black-red. Price of Loyalty is, well, not back, but continues existing. So this is something you want to pay attention to. Pax Betrayal is the act of treason, a variant of Midnight Hunt, and it's a common. It's a 3-mana common. Well, if you control a wolf or a werewolf, you also get the scry, but the point is, these are good black cards that you will play, I think, in any black deck and pick. Especially the Eaten Alive is a high pick, and the Ecstatic Awakener is good too, because it's a 1-mana 1/1, and then when you get to sacrifice another creature, usually a Decayed Zombie token, you get to draw a card, and this becomes a for 3 mana you get a 4/4 creature. That is very good value. But why am I picking these cards? These are all commons. You can steal your opponent's creature, and then if you pay first 3 mana for it. Then if you have Eaten Alive in your hand, you might even be able to attack with the creature, or maybe not, and then just pay 1 more black mana, sacrifice the opponent's creature, get to kill something else they have. Fantastic combination. And then for the Ecstatic Awakener, you of course need a total of 6 mana. But 6 mana is not that hard in limited. You steal your opponent's creature, sacrifice it, draw a card, and then this becomes a 4/4. That's an amazing synergy. And I actually have to say I don't like the fact that all these are common. I like the fact that these black cards are commons, because I want to use them with the Decayed Zombies. I don't like the fact that Pax Betrayal is a common. This will be a fairly common play pattern, and it's going to be a huge blowout when you are the player, when you are the player taking the hit here. Of course, if you are the player casting this stuff, it's great, but be prepared for this. The Price of Loyalty continues happening, just like it was a thing in the Forgotten Realms draft. And there's also one common that works here, but I didn't put it here. Black has a 5-mana common that is about 7/6 Menace, I think. But as an additional cost, you have to either sacrifice a creature or pay, was it 2 additional mana. So it works with Pax Betrayal, but that requires a total of 8 mana. So that's maybe not that common of an occurrence that you have 8 mana. So that's why I didn't put it in the same group of cards here. All right, now we go to green-red. So this is basically the werewolf combination. Both have a number of werewolves. And let's see the gold cards first. So first we have the Keswick Naturalist, 2-mana 2/2, and it acts as a mana producer when you attack with it. and the werewolf card is a pump spell. Well, not a spell, but a pump effect for your wolves and werewolves, and then the same mana producing ability remains here. So pretty good. I mean, for a 2 mana 2/2, this is just, even if you never get to pump any of other your werewolves or wolves, this is gonna be a good card. The 2 mana that can be a 3/3 also, and the mana adding ability is great. This is a very good card. And then of course the Unnatural Moonrise is going to be very good in the werewolf deck, because you can just immediately make all your werewolves, you can turn them into the better side, the night side, and you don't have to use a card for it necessarily, because you have the chance to also draw a card that turn, because this gives +1/+0 and trample to a creature, and the werewolves are very big. So it will be easy to trample over some damage and draw a card. It also has a flashback, so this is going to be a very, I'm not sure if I gave it the proper respect in my set review, but now that I was thinking about these archetypes and checking out the red and green cards, this is, I think, going to be a pretty key in red and green. Okay, so I picked these cards for the werewolf deck, which red and green often will be. And why I'm taking a Lunar Frenzy and Stolen Vitality, both because they give trample to your creature. The werewolves are really big when it's night, and they're also easy to jump block. But when you're like a 4 to 6 power creature, can get additional power and also trample, it's going to be very easy to finish the game quickly with them. So that's about why I think the Lunar Frenzy and Stolen Vitality are specifically good in the red-green color combination. These are both good cards in any red deck, but in red-green I'm actively looking to get at least some number of copies for these. And then I chose I could have chosen any number of creatures from the red and green available options, but I chose the Bird Admirer for the reason that so it's a 3 mana 1 for reach, and then a 3/5 reach when it's night, because red and green isn't a very aggressive archetype. Green isn't, well, red has aggressive cards, of course, because it's very good with the vampires, but the green, there are good 2-drops for green, but there are not that many good and aggressive 3-drops, and the 4-drops are also, there's a 1 4 mana green card that makes a 4/4 token. That's of course fantastic, but otherwise green is pretty defensive, and the werewolf deck is more like a mid-range, slightly a late game deck. So you want to have this early defense. A 3 mana 1 for reach will be great, and of course even better when it's 3/5, but that's a good 3-drop in the red-green deck. Don't care about the fact it only has 1 power. You actually want to survive a bit later for your red and green cards to, for you to gain the full benefit of them. So that's why I chose the Bird Admirer here, and then why I'm choosing the Bounding Wolf is that it has flash. So if you have werewolves, you want night to be a thing, and of course you will get night when you cast no spells during your own turn. Well, not casting a spell during a turn is horrible. You want to always use all your mana, and that's where the flash comes in. So the Bounding Wolf will be a perfect thing to play when you want to flip your werewolves. You want night to be a thing, and then you can just pass your turn and play a flash creature on the opponent's turn. Or you can have, of course, some instants too, but a flash creature is something you can always play. It's not really, you don't care what the opponent does, you can always play this and still use your mana. So that's why I think the Bounding Wolf is going to be decent in the red-green archetype. I don't think it's that good. A flash and reach 3 mana 3/2 isn't that exciting in, let's say, green-white perhaps, unless you have a lot of those green werewolves. But in red-green, assuming you have a bunch of werewolves, I think the Bounding Wolf is something you want to at least keep an eye on during the draft. And then, do I have anything else to say about the red-green archetype? I think I said all I think about it now. So I think it's a late game focused color combination. You want to have some defensive cards, and of course the red cheap removal helps there too. Alright, so let's go to green-white. I need to drink a bit of water here. Sorry about that, I almost lost my voice there. So A green-white is the color combination that takes the full benefit from the Coven ability. Both green and white cards have a lot of these, so if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, good stuff happens, and I think you want to maximize that. So first, let's see the gold uncommons here. The Vigilance 3/3 for 3 mana with a pretty good Coven ability, getting just additional power for all creatures you have. That's just fantastic. And the Join the Dance for 2 mana you get 2 tokens, and then it has a flashback for 5 mana. So it's just good value card, no matter what. Both are fairly high picks, I think. I don't think I would first pick the Join the Dance, but the Dawnheart Wardens I could see first picking from a pack that is not that exciting. So Gavony Trapper here. Why I'm picking it here is, well, I can actually talk about this at the same time as I talk about the Dawnheart Mentor. The reason I chose these cards for here as a highlight is that these have 0 power, and that's usually a drawback for a card for a creature if it doesn't have any power. But it will be fantastic in setting up your Coven. Then if you have a 0 power creature, you only need 2 others, let's say normal creatures with some actual power value. So these are going to be good. So for example, this Tapper I think would be not as good in the green-white archetype, at least if it had 1 power. Yeah, that's my opinion. Anyway, otherwise it's just 2 mana to tap a creature is fine. It's not as good, of course. I mean, the difference between 1 and 2 is a lot. So all tappers that only cost 1 mana to tap, they are fantastic cards in limited. Those that cost 2 mana to tap, they are still okay, but they are definitely not that great. But given that it's so good with the Coven stuff, I do like the Gavony Trapper, especially in this color combination. And the same applies for the Dawnheart Mentor. You get a 1/1 exact, in fact, also the 1/1 and the 0/4, so you only need 1 other creature which has 2 or more power to trigger your Coven stuff. This also has a very good activated ability if you are at 6 mana, which makes it also a nice card. But yeah, mostly because you get the good Coven this enables Coven so easily. Right, and then the other cards I picked here. Ritual of Hope is, I think, a really, really, really high pick for green-white. It can be a high pick for some other white decks too, but especially for green-white, because you are almost you should be easily getting the Coven, because, well, first of all, a lot of your cards will care about Coven, and then this color combination has many ways to enable the Coven. So this is a very good 2 mana +2/+1 to each of your creatures. It's just it's good, and there's a bit of a go wide theme in the green-white here too, which we see in the Join in the Dance. It's not the only card that creates multiple creatures. And then the Bramble Armor, I wanted to pick it because it's not an amazing card, but in this color combination, it does contribute in the sense that it allows you to make easier the Coven happen. So of course you might have a lot. Let's say if you have like a 3 2/2s and 2 1/1s, or let's say 3 2 power creatures, 2 1 power creatures. Well, that's 5 creatures, but you don't have Coven. Bramble Armor with the +2 power is going to make it easy. You are going to make it so that if you have 3 creatures, most likely you will get Coven happen already. It's not a high pick, but I'm saying that this card is not a particularly good card for most the color combinations. For example, the red-green deck, I wouldn't think that Bramble Armor is very playable in that color combination, but in green-white it definitely will. So green-white, probably a go wide. Well, this Ritual of Hope is an uncommon, so you can't assume to always get it, but try to get good benefit from the Coven abilities, and there are also pump spells you might need, because the amount of removal is of course limited in green and white, so you probably need some pump spells to have the ability to push through. But mostly I think almost all, if not all, the Coven cards are very good when you are almost guaranteed to get the Coven triggers happen. So try to focus on them and make sure you have the Coven enabled as easily as possible. For black and white, this is a color combination that we see a theme in the gold uncommons. Sadly, white doesn't really contribute to that theme too much because, well, white, of course, it's not really a white thing in Magic the Gathering to use additional cost to sacrifice your creatures. But anyway, both the gold uncommons have additional cost. Well, not an additional cost, but let's say benefit from sacrificing stuff. And this also, not only benefits from when you sacrifice, but also is a way to sacrifice stuff, and it's becoming. I mean, this is of course fantastic. The Flesh Taker. So let's briefly go through it. 2 mana 2/2, great. A nice little bonus effect when you sacrifice creatures, 1 life and scry. Not like the most impactful thing in the world, but it's definitely nice. But for 1 mana and sacrificing a creature, this becomes, gets +2/+2, and you can do this multiple times of turn. Now, of course, what you want to sacrifice for this is mostly, of course, the decayed zombies that black will produce. White doesn't get you those, but white has disturb creatures, so you can sacrifice also those. The Flesh Taker is very good in white-black. Of course, it has to be in white-black because it's a white-black 2-drop. Alright, and Rite of Oblivion is obviously fantastic if you have disturb creatures or decayed zombies. The additional cost is not really a big deal, and you get to exile a non-land permanent. This not only exiles creatures, but also some other problematic permanents potentially. And with the flashback, you get double dip. It's just a fantastic card and easily first pickable. And what I picked here for the white and black archetype is Beloved Beggar, because I think the white and black archetype, it can be a bit fast. Black has aggressive commons, white has nice aggressive 2-drops, but it can also be a bit grindy. So an 0/4 that eventually you can, in one way or another, it ends up in your graveyard and it becomes a 4/4 flying vigilance creature, which is fantastic. So this is good for early defense, and then at some point you get to get a good flyer out of it. And of course, it is perfect sacrifice fodder too for this kind of stuff. And of course, black has, it's not listed in here, but the black has the sacrifice cards too. So all the disturbed creatures will be fine. Fantastic with the black cards that have an additional cost of sacrificing a creature. And then Unruly Mob is, I wanted to pick it here because it's an okay card no matter what. But in black and white, you most likely can get the +1/+1 counters a lot easier than in some other color combinations. Because first of all, if you attack with a decayed zombie, whether the opponent blocks it so that it dies or it dies at the end of combat, it will give a counter to Unruly Mob. And of course, we have all this sacrifice stuff that will just help this thing grow as well. So I think this is at its best in a white and black deck. Not really like a high pick, but it's something you want to play in white and black decks. Blade Brand is here. I could have again picked a lot of different options here, but I took the Blade Brand because it's also pretty decent with the disturbed creatures. So you don't mind if disturbed creatures die, so you can just attack with those. An opponent might think that maybe they want to attack with it just because they want it to end up in the graveyard, so that you can play the flying creature. But then you can use Blade Brand to actually eat whatever they're blocking with, or the other way around, you can jump block with the disturbed creature. But with this Blade Brand, you can also just make the opposing attacker die. It's not, like, again, not a high pick, but this is one other color combination where I think Blade Brand is a fine card to have in your deck. And the Heirloom Mirror, I think it's playable in all the black decks, mostly because black cards can give you those. Sorry. No. I wasn't actually. This doesn't sacrifice a creature, but the point is that you have to discard a card, and what is great to discard is, of course, spells with flashback and creatures with disturb. So that's because this is a looting. Well, not looting. This is a rummaging. So you have to discard first, and then you get to draw a card. But point is, what the backside is a 4/4 flyer that can become permanently bigger. So that's a great card to have. It takes some time and setup to do it, of course, and costs you a bit of life as well. But if you can discard disturb creatures to draw these cards and get these ritual counters on this thing, that's pretty fantastic. And that's why I wanted to pick it here. I think it in white and black, it's a particularly good card. Also works in blue and black, of course, because you can also discard blue creatures with disturb. And otherwise, if you don't have these gold uncommons, it's not going to be a very sacrificey specific archetype in that case. And I think white and black in that case is mostly just a bit mid-range deck. It depends on how much of the black removal, the quality removals you have, how slow or fast your deck will be. But if you get these gold uncommons, you can definitely try to make the kind of sacrifice archetype shine with the black and white. And then we go to black and green. And as you can see, I have not picked any monocolored cards. I tried and tried and tried to see if there's like a good theme for black and green, but I just couldn't find it. So these are the gold uncommons. For what it's worth, these are both, in my opinion, first pickable cards. These are fantastic. But the green doesn't really contribute to these. So of course black has, decayed zombies are great with the grizzly ghoul. You can attack with them and they will die no matter what. And then this enters the battlefield as a bigger creature. And also it makes this thing cheaper. But there's no really green cards that play into this stuff. At least I couldn't really find. Maybe there's some rare, but I didn't check the higher rarity cards for this video at all. So I'm thinking that the black-green deck is, well, if you get these cards, that's fantastic. But otherwise, I think the way to draft the black-green deck is that you get those high-quality black removal spells because they are, high peaks, so you might just end up with a lot of them if black is open. And then if green is the most open color after that, you just take some green cards and it will most likely be a mid-rangey deck. Definitely not that fast because green lacks a bit of the aggression. So it's going to be a mid-range deck. Most likely, and I couldn't just find. I didn't want to force myself to pick some examples here. I would say that most of the green cards and most of the black cards will work pretty equally well in this color combination than in some others. So I didn't want to pick any examples here, but it's still, especially if you get these cards, it's going to be a fantastic color combination to be in. Alright, I have nothing else to say about that. And then there's a blue-green archetype. It's also a bit, well, I guess it's defined by graveyard synergies based on the cards they have. And here's the examples I picked here. The Root Coil Creeper it's going to be a good card anyway. I'm not really sure if I want to first pick it, but a 2-mana 2/2 that taps to add any color is definitely great accelerating spell. And then when you have stuff to cast from graveyard, this works for disturb and flashback both, and you get to get a nice discount for those things. And then you have the third ability to return a flashback spell that you already used twice. You can get it back and get even more uses for that. So that's a very good 2-drop. And the Winterthorn Blessing is it's one of those cards that I really have to see how it plays out, because of course it doesn't give you any other permanent advantage than the couple of counters, but the fact it taps a creature and prevents it from untapping, it is going to make it easier for you to raise. So combining the +1/+1 counter and the tap ability and the fact it has a fairly cheap flashback cost, I don't want to say it's unplayable. I didn't respect this a lot in my set review, but I was thinking about it a little bit more now, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is a fairly decent card in the end. You get to lock down up 2 opposing creatures. Not only tap once, but also prevent them from untapping once. It can help a lot in games where you are, well, most of the limited games are often, well, maybe not most, but a lot of the limited games come down to racing, and this helps you in a race situation a lot. It's definitely not a first pickable card, but when you are blue-green, why not? I would want to at least try this before I know better. And what else cards I picked here? Well, there are 3 with the same theme. Let's first go through the Storm Rider Spirit. I don't think it's a good card. It wasn't good in Zendikar Rising, it wasn't the same name, but it was a 5 mana flash 3/3 flyer. It definitely wasn't good there, and I don't think in Modern Limited this is good enough. You need more stats for a 5 mana creature, even if it flies. And the flash is nice, but it's not really easy to surprise block. Well, I mean, you can surprise block 2 power attackers, and that's it. Not gonna happen that often in on turn 5 and later. But why I did pick it here is that it's something to keep in mind if you end up with a lot of green werewolves, because this is another flash spell. So if you have like a, let's say 5 or more werewolves, then the flash creature becomes more reasonable, because you can just pass with all your mana up, make it become night. Your werewolves are now better, and then you can still use 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer. So that's something I would never pick highly, but I mean this should be a pretty late pick in the draft, and you end up with this, and you most often won't put it in your deck. But in a green-blue deck with a lot of werewolves, you can consider running this if you don't have a lot of other expensive cards. It's not high priority, but it's something you might want to play. Alright, and then the rest of the stuff in green and blue, it seems to be designed for graveyard synergy, and there are a lot of other cards in both colors that self-mill or have flashback and all that. So that's probably where your green-blue deck should try to be it in. And the Ominous Roost is also in this color combination. It's gonna be better in here than it's in white-blue. I also picked this for the white-blue archetype, because you shouldn't have trouble casting stuff from your graveyard when you have a blue flashback and disturb spells, and green has a lot of flashback spells. So this is going to be a fairly decent card in a blue and green. And then there's the Death Bonnet Sprout. You just basically want to self-mill in this color combination, and you might have other self-milling, and it's going to be somewhat fast maybe to transform this into a 1 mana 3/3 basically, which also can keep growing, because if you have more of those self-mill cards, it's going to be pretty fantastic. I mean, this card. So yeah, high pick in green-blue, and I think it is going to be good in any green deck, but specifically in green-blue, it's something you want to pick very high. And then there's a Tapping at the Window. I could have chosen some other kind of flashback spell here, but it's one of the cards that will definitely be very playable in green-blue, maybe not so much in some other green decks. For example, green-white, I don't think Tapping at the Window is a card you should put in the deck, most of the time at least. But yeah, this combines self-mill with the, well, I mean, you reveal, I assume, well, it doesn't combine it with anything else than you get to pick a creature card ideally, and then you get the self-mill as a side effect, which is what you are looking for when you are playing green and blue. And the flashback, of course, makes it playable, because when you do it once, you might whiff on the creature, and it's not great, but with the flashback, at least you have another shot of getting a creature back, and then you get to self-mill again. So it's one of the cards that is not really good, but in this color combination, I think definitely you should at least try it and see how it performs. And green-blue is definitely not aggressive. It's a slow, grindy deck, and you want to play defensive creatures. A green 1/4 werewolf with reach, and there's a blue 1/4 also, and there's a 5-drops which have a lot of toughness. You are interested in such cards when you play green and blue. You are trying to look flashback value, very late game value in this color combination. Then we have a red and blue archetype, which is it has a very well defined theme, and which shows in these uncommons very nicely. So the 5 mana dragon makes your instant and sorceries cheaper to cast, which is great. Also affects, of course, flashback costs. And then this becomes bigger when you play those spells, and it can happen multiple times per turn. So this could attack for 6 or even 8 in the air, and that's great. And Arcane Infusion, I would assume that most of the time when you play blue-red, you want to put a lot of instants and sorceries into your deck. So this shouldn't whiff that often. With the flashback, you hopefully at least get hit on the second cast. It is pretty expensive though. But ideally you just have, at least 10 instant or sorceries in your deck when you play blue-red. You can have even more. Then the Arcane Infusion also becomes quite good. And this is the color combination I think, where I'm interested in running Delver of Secrets. In any other blue deck, I don't think it's really that great, because 1 mana 1/1 is really bad. 1 mana 3/2 is really good, of course. But let's say if you have maybe in a blue black deck, you might have a 7 instant or sorceries. It's not gonna be a that high chance to flip this Delver. You have to be somewhat lucky. There are not that many ways to fix your top of your deck to be an instant or sorcery. So you have to basically rely on luck most of the time, and that requires, like I said, if you're playing blue-red, you want to have at least 10 instant or sorceries, and with that, the Delver is going to hit often enough that it makes it a nice card to pick for the deck. And then the Unblinking Observer is, I mean, it's probably going to be good in any blue deck, because you will always have some instant or sorceries, and in blue decks you also will have disturb creatures. But in this archetype specifically, this is gonna give a lot of mana for you, because assuming you are playing the high count of instant or sorceries, it's just a very good 2 mana 2/1 that taps for mana. It's great. And then we have the red common here, which is just made for this deck. So basically a 2 mana 1/3 that gets a lot of power boosts when you play instant or sorceries. So it's the card you are actually going to pick pretty high in this color combination, whereas for some other red decks you maybe don't want to play this at all. But in this, it's definitely one of your best, not best, but one of the better cards anyway. And then we have the Seize the Storm. Not really good unless you have a lot of instant and sorceries, and of course the idea for this color combination is to have a lot of them. So this is almost unplayable in some other color decks, but in this you should really, I think it's pretty good of a card in blue-red. And when you are drafting a blue-red deck, you can just play all kinds of flashback spells and cantrips, instant and sorceries, all kinds. They are mostly good cards. I don't think they are really bad at all. But I didn't list all of them, but there are a lot of them. You know, with the -2, -0 that draws your card, makes a decay the zombie token. Then there's the opt, which is not an opt because it doesn't scry, but you can put the card to your graveyard. So that's great in this deck and all that. Basically, a ton of instant and sorceries. There shouldn't be a shortage of them when you're drafting this archetype. You will find enough instant and sorceries. It's just finding the correct balance between creatures, number of creatures, and what's the creature mana curve, and the other spells in your deck. And that will, I mean, I can't comment on that too much. Of course, you want to curve out reasonably well in every game, but you also need ways to win. So I will see when I get to draft the archetype myself that what's the optimal kind of mana curve for the color combination. And then lastly, we have red and white here, which seems to be a very aggressive deck. One thing of note is that what we see here, well, maybe I just talk about the Sacred Fire. There's nothing else to say, that it's just a good card. It doesn't play into any theme really. It's just a card you will always play when you are red and white. Anyway, Sunrise Cavalier shows a theme that is actually pretty present. There are other color cards that have this, but in red and white, there are most of these cards that say if it's neither day or night, it becomes day as this thing enters the battlefield. This is not the only one. So, of course, red has also a lot of werewolves. White doesn't, or maybe it has like a higher rarity werewolf, if I recall correctly. But at common or uncommon, I don't think white has werewolves. But white has these things that still care about day becoming a night, or vice versa. And that's a small theme here, which means that you might be interested in having, there is at least one uncommon flash creature for white, but there are some, instants, especially red instant removal, you might be interested in having in your deck, because that allows you to at least make a day into a night. It's easier to make a night into a day because that just requires casting 2 spells. Doesn't matter if they are instants or whatever they are, but you might be interested in making a day changing into a night when you play this color combination. So maybe play some number of instants. Otherwise, this is a very aggressive archetype. By the way, the Sunrise Cavalier is easily a first pickable card. It's such a good one. 3 mana, 3/3 trample and haste, with the the ability to just create +1/+1 counters out of nowhere. It's a very good card. And I checked out the cards, the commons and uncommons from Red and White, and it seems you want to just be an aggressive deck. Red has some number of removal, but White doesn't have a lot, which means that you maybe want to. I didn't pick any creatures here because basically all the creatures are good. It doesn't really matter which of them are. Maybe you want to be focused on a very early curving out. You want to have the cheap creatures. There's the red 1-drop that has first strike when attacking, for instance, with the pump ability, and there are 2-drops. White has 3 2-drops at common already, so you want to have all those cheap creatures. But what you are going to use to push through is, I think, the pump spells. Of course the red removal is fantastic, but let's go here through the Flare of Fate. This is the human pump spell that also works on other creatures. Giving a +2/+2 is still fine, but it's especially good for humans, and of course the color combination has a lot of humans. All the werewolves are humans on the front side, for instance, and most of the white creatures are humans too. So this is going to be one way to push through damage. When you have small creatures and opponent has played some 4 or 5-drop, you can still use the Flare of Fate and similar cards to push through. And Ritual of Hope, I think the Coven is going to be important for this archetype too, and Ritual of Hope will be a high pick for red and white, and you will most likely have a lot of creatures. So the mass pump is going to be very useful. And then I picked and abandoned the Post here for the reason that it's the kind of card that rarely is playable. You have to be hyper aggressive. But I think the red-white deck can utilize it. It's still not a high pick, and it's not a card you will always want to run, but it's something you could run in red-white decks. This is going to make it easier to deal the last point of damage. For 6 mana you can make 4 creatures unable to block, and then I guess the more common scenario is that you use this. Opponent has left like 2 blockers, and then you use this, and whoops, you get to deal like 7 damage when they thought that they are not gonna really be dealt much damage at all. And then the flashback option is gonna be great. The opponent has to be super defensive. They will see it coming, but I mean, what can they do about it? They need to leave all the creatures to block if you have been able to carry out the aggressive game plan here. And the Lunar Frenzy is very good in this archetype too. It was also picked for the red-green because it's so good, and the trample is so good for the big werewolves. But here the first strike and trample is going to be a great way to finish. This is almost like an X spell to X dealing damage spell. X spell that deals damage to face. This is very similar to such a spell in this aggressive archetype. So at 5 mana you can give +4/+0 first strike and trample to some of your 2 or 3 power creature that's being blocked by something with 2 or 3 toughness. It's gonna be great. So this is a very high pick, I think, for this archetype. And yeah, there's nothing much else to say about the red-white. Pick cheap creatures and all the red removal that you can have, and then supplement them with a couple of pump spells, and that should be good to go. And then if you found some other, especially if you find the Cavalier, but there are also some monocolored red and white cards with the day-night cycle, triggers that benefit from those. You might want to also focus a bit on some instant speed effects that you can force the day to become a night. And that's it. That is it for the Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Very initial archetype breakdown, and we will see how accurate those were. I'm going to, of course, start drafting the set immediately after the patch, and hoping, of course, that the patch will be successful and there won't be any technical difficulties. Yeah, fingers crossed about that. And definitely I will be drafting as soon as I can, and I will be uploading all my Midnight Hunt drafts on my channel. So the next video you will see from me will be a Midnight Hunt draft, hopefully on Friday, but if there's some difficulties, then as soon as possible. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.